So I know it's been a few weeks since I uploaded my video explaining that I was taking a break to work on new content. However, I felt like I had to put a video out as a thank you for helping this channel hit a big milestone. I recently hit 1,000 subscribers, and while that may seem like a small number to some people, for me personally it's a pretty big deal. Watching this channel grow over the last 2 years has been such a cool thing to see. I didn't really have any expectations for how well my videos will perform, but to see the response I've had so far has been so encouraging and so inspiring. Essentially, before I get stuck into the rest of this video, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's listened to me talk about old games, and more importantly, I'd like to thank you for coming back week after week. It honestly means a lot to me, and I can't thank you enough for the support in helping my little channel grow. Okay, so as part of this 1K thank you / celebration video, I posted the idea of a Q&A video on Twitter and my YouTube community page and asked you to throw some questions at me, and you did just that. Now, there were quite a few questions and some of them were very similar, so to ensure that I don't ramble on for too long, I'll be grouping some of them up. Also, apologies off top for any mispronunciations of anybody's names. Which leads me on to my first couple of questions, so here we go. We kick things off with a few questions grouped together. NBK Silent asks, what's the next game you will be reviewing? GoJaysGo asks, with the new format will you be uploading weekly and will the length of your videos be affected? And Ollie Latonen asks if I will ever review PS1 games. I feel like I can answer all three of these as a group. In terms of reviews, they are on hold for a while. My focus will solely be on the new content. My first new project has only just started and there's a lot to figure out when it comes to how I'm going to put it together and how it will be released, as it includes multiple games rather than focusing on just one. I will be returning to reviews at some point in the future, but when I do, I doubt it will be covering PS1 games. The reason I focus on the 6th generation is because I'm much more familiar with that era. I do have a lot of love and fond memories for the previous generation, but my philosophy for creating content has always been talk about what you know. I played a lot of PS1 games, but at that time I wasn't as obsessed with the industry as a whole as I was like during the PS2 and Xbox period. So I hope that covers all of those questions, but I'll do my best to keep you all informed on the updates for my channel as I move forward. Okay, next couple of questions. Sean B asks if I use a CRT TV, and Red Gun Ninja asks about what setup I play all of my retro games on. I don't use a CRT TV. I'd like to play all of this stuff in its original format, but it always comes down to a question of space. So I play all of my games on a 4K television, but my older consoles are connected to that screen through component cables, and I also use a HDMI converter for when I'm capturing footage. Question number 3. Nathan Freeman asks what was your very first console and first game that you played on that console, and Ludicrous Fool 79 asks what video game systems do you own? So this question depends on your definition of console, I guess. The very first game system I ever received was the original grey brick Game Boy for my 5th birthday, and it came with Super Mario Land 1 and 2 and a terrible version of Street Fighter 2. If we're talking non-handheld, then my first console was a Sega Mega Drive, which came with Sonic and a 3-in-1 cartridge that literally everyone I know owned, that included Golden Axe, Shinobi and Streets of Rage. Fast forward to 2019 and my gaming collection has grown somewhat, as it now includes all of the PlayStations, all of the Xboxes, a Nintendo Wii, a 2DS XL, and still that Sega Mega Drive. Question 4. MP But Spookier asks what is your favourite console of all time, and Destro WAD asks even though you review Xbox games, it seems like you prefer PS2, is this true? This is a tough one, to be honest. The whole reason I started making these videos is because both the PS2 and the original Xbox are special to me, but in different ways. I wouldn't say I prefer one over the other, because during that generation I was bouncing between both of those consoles frequently, but if I had to choose one console as my all-time favourite, I'd say that the PS2 would edge it for me ever so slightly. The reason for this is that the PS2 not only has a fantastic library of games from both Western and Eastern developers, but its impact on the world is just too large to measure, and there's a reason why it's the best-selling console of all time. Steady Sphere asks what is your Mount Rushmore of games? Well, first off, I think I have to immediately throw Ryu on there. The first game I ever played was Street Fighter 2 at a friend's house. I was 4 years old, I had no idea what gaming was, I had no idea who this dude with a red headband was, or why blue fire was coming out of his hands, but I did know two things. One, this guy seems incredibly fucking cool, and two, I want to be involved. The second spot would have to go to Pokemon Trainer Red. I know he's not really much of a character, but Pokemon Red was a game I spent a lot of time with, and was actually my first adventure/RPG that I actually stuck with. The final two spots would have to go to Solid Snake and Master Chief, because both of their franchises are arguably my top two franchises of all time, which leads me nicely onto question number 6. Dark Lord Jado asks, what are your favourite gaming franchises? Now, I've never actually formed a proper list on this topic, but if we're talking more towards the retro end of the scale, I'd have to say that Metal Gear Solid and Halo, as I just mentioned, are incredibly important to me. One of them introduced me to a cinematic style of gaming that I had never seen before and got me hooked on its story. The other opened my eyes to the possibilities through multiplayer, and I've had a ton of fond memories as a result. I have a massive soft spot for the Splinter Cell series, along with Max Payne, Devil May Cry, Burnout, and Onimusha. I also have damn near heartbreaking nostalgic feelings for the old SmackDown games, and there's really just too many franchises to mention, but those are some of the first ones that pop into my head. Question number 7 comes from Fluke666, who asks, which franchise do you find overrated and which do you find underrated? Now, to be honest, I don't just want to flat out say that a specific game is overrated, as I'm not a big believer in that perspective on games, but if I had to name a game that is popular that I've never got along with, it would basically be the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series. I'm not one to say that these are bad games, because let's be honest, I've played a lot of bad games for this channel, and these certainly aren't that. However, I will say that I've tried to get into these numerous times and failed almost every time. These are games that I respect from a distance, but the moment-to-moment gameplay of these titles just isn't engaging enough for me. Plus, I've always leaned more towards games that are on the shorter side anyway. In terms of underrated, I always felt that these Zone of the Enders games didn't get enough love, mostly because they lived in the shadow of Metal Gear Solid, but those games had some pretty cool ideas that they executed well, and some great art design to go along with them too. Till this day, I'm still a little bit gutted that we never got a third game, but that's how it goes, I guess. The next couple of questions come from Mohammed, who asks about my favourite Nintendo DS games, and also Not Another Game Collector, who asks about my favourite games for the GBA. What I'll have to do instead is a top 5 across all of the systems, so as I mentioned earlier, obviously Pokemon Red is a very important game to me. I honestly couldn't tell you how many hours I spent with that game, and Pokemon Gold now that I mention it. Other handheld highlights for me were Super Mario Land 2, which I completed numerous times, and this is now one of the virtual console games I play on my 2DS XL. When I did eventually upgrade to the Game Boy Advance, Super Mario Advance was also one of my favourites. Also on the GBA, I spent a surprising amount of time playing Golden Sun. I haven't played it in years, so I can't comment on its quality now, but it certainly had me hooked back then. Finally, to round out this top 5, and this is a bit of a guilty pleasure if I'm honest, but I really enjoyed Legacy of Goku. Looking back on it, it wasn't a game of the highest quality, but I still had fun with it at the time. Coming in with a question that may be too big for me to answer, Sean the CHB asks if I think single player gaming is dead. Without going on about this for too long, I suppose the short answer is no. I don't think it's dead at all, and I don't think it will ever die. In my opinion, I think there are a lot of developers out there that still love the idea of creating a great story. Obviously, the industry as a whole is a business and needs money to keep the lights on, but just looking at the next 6 to 8 months alone, we have so many great examples, from The Last of Us 2 to Cyberpunk, Death Stranding, Jedi The Fallen Order, and much, much more. I think what has changed over recent years is there isn't really a middle tier of gaming anymore. It's either big budget AAA or it's indie, and last generation there used to be a middle tier that produced great games like Singularity, Enslaved, Vanquish, and so on. Ultimately, I don't think single player can ever go away, because the people with the talent and the people that are in charge were most likely inspired to get into the industry by the Zeldas, the Metal Gears, and the Final Fantasies, and that will most likely reflect in their future work, or at least that's what I hope for. Colonel Falcon asks what game can make you drop everything and play it. So when it comes to playing games, I generally try to stick to one at a time, as I just find it's easier to manage. However, on some rare occasions I'll get a message from my old Halo 2 clan, and at that point pretty much nothing else matters. I know that might seem like a bit of a boring answer, but I actually ran the numbers on how much Halo 2 multiplayer I played back in the day, and it totaled up to just under 750 hours, which is roughly 31 days. The game connected me with a lot of cool people from across the world, and 15 years later we're still friends, so it's always good to catch up. Question 11 comes from Bruno, who actually asked me two questions. The first is, which game made you happy from start to finish and puts you in a good mood just by thinking about it? And the second question was, which was my favourite Capcom and SNK character? I guess from answers to my earlier questions I'd have to say Ryu. Cliched, I know, but it's just Ryu. In terms of games that put me in a good mood till this day, that might be a tie between Lord of the Rings Return of the King and SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. Both games I played at enormous length with my best friend. Lord of the Rings was an excellent co-op adventure that we burned through over the course of a weekend, unlocking every upgrade and hidden character that the game had to offer. And SmackDown Here Comes the Pain came out at probably the peak of my long interest in the WWE, and we used to stay up all night creating our own pay-per-views and storylines, so it really was just an awesome time for me. Trip the Console asks, of all the games I've reviewed, which surprised me the most? For this question there are three that stand out. The first is The Suffering, which is a great third-person horror shooter that I honestly didn't expect to be anything more than mediocre on first glance, but it turned out to be a real joy to play. Secondly is Total Overdose, another game that I had low expectations for and completely ignored when it was originally released, but the game is just so stupid and plays well enough that it's hard not to have a good time with it. Finally, I'd have to add Freedom Fighters, which had a good reputation, but before playing it I was sort of thinking that surely it had aged poorly over time and its impressive mechanics back then wouldn't hold up today. But fortunately I was 100% wrong, and it's one of the best games I've played in recent times. Our penultimate question comes from Combo Broker, who asked, which classics have I never played and never intend to play? Well, okay, this may seem blasphemous, especially as I've spoken a bit about my Nintendo handheld history in this video, but I actually have a huge blind spot when it comes to some of Nintendo's classic franchises. I'm more specifically talking about Zelda, Mario and Metroid. For Zelda I played a few hours of Wind Waker and that was it. For Metroid I played a good chunk of the original Metroid Prime but nothing more. And finally for Mario, apart from the Game Boy games I mentioned earlier and Mario Galaxy for the Wii, that's it. I've never played the original Mario games, I've never played the original Metroid or Super Metroid, nor have I played Ocarina of Time. This is mainly because I was given a Sega Mega Drive as a kid instead of a SNES, and then I turned into a PlayStation kid, and to this day I'm still curious and I probably look at buying a Switch once a week, but for some reason I just never pull the trigger on that purchase. And the final question comes from Matthew Marin, who asks, what is the worst and best game I have ever played? When it comes to the worst game, there are two that stand out for me, both which I have reviewed recently, and they are Stealth Force, The War on Terror, and The Sniper 2. Both of them are shooters for the PlayStation 2, both of them made by the same company, and both of them make me sad that I'll never get the time back that I lost playing them, but feel free to check out my review on those games for more information. Finally, the best game that I have ever played. There really is only one choice for me personally. It's a game that I've completed countless times, it's a game that I never stop enjoying, and it's a game that I feel changed me from a kid that plays games sometimes to a kid that wants to play games all of the time. That game is the original Metal Gear Solid. I could talk for hours about this title, and don't worry, I won't do that here, maybe in a future video, but the impact that this game had on me was unbelievable. Up until playing it, I was only kind of interested in playing games that I could throw on the easiest difficulty, and even enter a few cheat codes to make it nothing but a power fantasy. Then Metal Gear Solid comes along and introduces me to challenge, patience and strategy, along with a fantastic cinematic story, and suddenly my taste in gaming shifted, and as a result I'm still in love with this hobby so many years later. Well, that's going to do it for this video. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Thanks again to everyone for your questions, thanks again to everyone for your continued support of my content. Please know know that as you're watching this video, I am most likely working on my next project, and I hope to have it with you soon, and as soon as I have an update on my next video, I'll be sure to let you know. So until next time, that's it from me.